Thank you, Mark. תודה רבה. אנחנו עוברים לשלב הסיכומים של האירוע הזה. הראשון בדוברים יהיה גנרל ג'ונתן שו, שהיה אחראי על תחום הסייבר במשרד ההגנה הבריטי. General, please.
Minister, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm not a technologist, I'm an operator. I'm 32 years a paratrooper and counter-terrorist operator. And when in my last 2 years I was given the job of the head of defense cybersecurity, I was so surprised I said to my wife, darling, did you ever imagine in your wildest dreams that you would be married to the head of cybersecurity in British defense? And she said, darling, I hate to disappoint you, but you don't appear in my wildest dreams. What it means is that I'm not going to talk today about technology. I'm going to talk today about human behaviors. And actually, the more I look at the threat from cyberspace, the more I think that behaviors is where we need to concentrate. Because in the end, cyberspace is just a tool. It's just a tool. It is just the latest means we have developed for human expression. And we'll see all of human activity there, for good or evil. And I think human motivation, human behaviors is where the answer to a lot of our cybersecurity threats might just lie. Let's address the question straight off. Is cybercrime potentially a national security threat? You bet it is. A quote from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff: economic weakness is our biggest security threat. Well, I agree with him. It was such a good quote that our Chief of Defence Staff in Britain copied it a couple of weeks later. And if cybercrime threatens our economies, therefore it is directly linked to our national security issues. And the risk of cybercrime, as we've heard, stretches not just from individual apps or individual fraud and theft, but right the way up to what our head of GCHQ, Sir Ian Lobban, described the other day as a national-scale industrial theft of intellectual property, and also banking fraud and clearing out banks. And if you look at some of the theft that's taken place of IP across the net, you know, when China nicks America's intellectual property for its stealth fighters and produces its own version of the stealth fighters that look so suspiciously like the American stealth fighter, is that an economic theft or is that a military theft or is it both? It's both, clearly. And if they can do that to the industrial sector, they could probably do it to the financial sector too, and that could bring back a whole new financial crash, which would have impacts on us all again. Who are these cyber criminals? Well, they're pirates, really. They're pirates feeding off the system, feeding off us, feeding off a system on which we have all become now dependent. These pirates need outlawing. More than that, the governments that harbour them needs outlawing, and that's where the challenge begins. Because if we're talking about national security, we've got to be upfront and blunt about it and recognise that there are some governments that find it in their interests to harbour cyber criminals and harbour these pirates. And until we've cracked that one, we're not going to get very far in solving this problem. If we look at the nature of attacks, the massive attacks tend to come from Asia. And if you want a conceptual justification for cyber theft, go no further than the two Chinese colonels' book called Unrestricted Warfare, printed just after America had proved its dominance on the conventional military battlefield by destroying Saddam's army in 1991. And it outlined a possible way that China could take on America anywhere but on the conventional battlefield. And of course they've used cyberspace to do that. That has come along since then and just been another means whereby these people might, if that book was indeed Chinese policy, might take on America. I'm not going to talk more about the Chinese threat though, because in a way the Chinese threat relies upon a reliable cyberspace. And I think the more frightening threat is a more sophisticated threat, comes from East Europe and Russia. because their threat might just undermine the entire secure cyberspace itself. The legacy of communism is widely described as being amorality, i.e. no morality. And if you look at the Russian mafia, that pretty much describes the way they operate, amorally. I'll quote from a Chatham House paper which explored the whole issue of the Russian mafia and give you two quotes. First quote: "Organized crime was never an outside factor in the Russian political and economic system. It was part of the process of building the new Russia." Here's the second quote: "Russian criminal activities are most prevalent in countries with a high concentration of ethnic Russians, the post-Soviet space, but also Israel and the United States." And given that we're talking about banking and finance, the links between Israel and the United States clearly illustrated by the appointments of the new head of the Bank of Israel being appointed from New York. Now, as was said in the previous talk, banking is based on trust. So anything that undermines trust scares bankers. Technologically speaking, as I understand it, the trust that we have in our banking system, and indeed our entire commercial system, depends on security certificates, the whole system of security certification. And increasing numbers of people approach me in dark corners and tell me quietly that it's strongly believed, but not yet proven, that the Russian mafia may have corrupted the security certification system, on which not just banking, but all commercial cybersecurity depends. Now, if the global banking community decided that the Russian mafia had hijacked the Israeli banks and their systems, they won't deal with them for fear of losing $1 billion or $2 billion. And all of a sudden, the Israeli economy collapses. So the question you might leave you with is, how secure is the Israeli certificate authority? I have no idea. But this isn't just an Israeli question, because such is the connectedness of our systems that any threat to the Israeli banking system will be a threat to the global system. So in a sense, the Israeli banking system might just be a canary in the coal mine, i.e. an early warning of what looks like a global problem. And if it's going to be a global problem, then it's going to need international cooperation to outlaw these cyber pirates. And for that to happen, all states have to accept that ultimately it's in the global interest, it's in their state interest to have a reliable cyberspace. And if we're going to operate in cyberspace and enforce laws, just to answer some of the questions earlier about needing a new defense doctrine, let's be quite clear about it. Defense doesn't work. Defense will be overwhelmed. We already know that. If we're going to operate successfully in cyberspace, we need to maneuver in cyberspace in a constantly fluid threat environment. And if we're going to do that, we need to attack in cyberspace. All governments are very coy about talking about cyber attack, but it's all there. They will say in veiled speech, and you get them in private off the record, and everyone will admit that actually they're developing cyber weapons. They just haven't worked out the policy of how to do it yet. And boy, we're going to need those cyber weapons. And we need to start attacking these cyber criminals online, and therefore we're going to need to start attacking these governments that harbor them. And that's where the international challenge is going to be. Because in the end, if we want to work out how secure cyberspace is ever going to be, one of the key judgment parameters on that will be how much all governments in the world recognize that their interests ultimately lie in having a secure cyberspace more than the profit that they can make by exploiting the insecurities of cyberspace. And that, to me, seems like the key challenge that we need to address if we want a secure cyberspace. Thank you.